The goat stood in the middle of Henry Xavier's corral like it owned the place, chewing on a piece of rope that had once secured his saddle. And Henry figured this was either divine intervention or the universe's idea of a cruel joke on a man who had been talking to his horse for the better part of 3 years. The morning sun beat down on his small ranch outside Austin, Texas, in the scorching summer of 1878, and Henry wiped the sweat from his brow as he approached the scraggly creature. The goat was white with brown patches. One ear flopped down while the other stood straight up, and it regarded him with the kind of indifference that only a goat could muster. Henry had found the animal 2 days ago wandering along the fence line, bleeding pitifully and against his better judgment. He had brought it inside the corral and given it water. Now it had made itself comfortable, and Henry had to admit that having another living thing around besides his mare, Constance, was not entirely unwelcome. He had been alone on this patch of land for nearly 4 years, ever since his father died and left him the modest ranch. At 26 years old, Henry had grown accustomed to solitude, to the quiet rhythm of his days spent mending fences, tending to the small herd of cattle he managed to keep alive, and riding into town once a month for supplies. The other ranch hands who worked the larger spreads would sometimes stop by for a drink, but mostly Henry kept to himself. It was easier that way, less complicated, and after watching his father waste away from consumption, Henry had convinced himself that needing people only led to heartache. The goat bleated at him, a sound that was somehow both demanding and pitiful, and Henry shook his head. He had put up notices in town asking if anyone had lost livestock, but so far nobody had claimed the creature. Part of him hoped nobody would. The goat was stubborn and had already eaten through 2 good lengths of rope, but it was company, and company was something Henry had not realized he was starving for until it appeared. He was pouring fresh water into a trough when he heard the sound of hooves approaching. Henry straightened, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept propped against the fence post, but he relaxed when he saw it was a woman on horseback, not a threat. She rode well, sitting straight in the saddle with an ease that spoke of years of experience. And as she drew closer, Henry felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in so long he barely recognized it as interest. She was young, probably around 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. Her face was flushed from the heat and the ride, and her eyes, a striking shade of green, scanned his property with purpose. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, the hem dusty from travel, and a worn leather vest over it. There was a determination in the set of her jaw that made Henry stand a little straighter. "Afternoon," he called out, moving toward the fence. "Can I help you with something?" The woman brought her horse to a stop just outside his gate and dismounted with practiced ease. Up close, Henry could see the sprinkle of freckles across her nose and the way her eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed him. "I am looking for my goat," she said, her voice carrying a slight breathlessness from the ride. "White with brown patches, one ear that does not stand right. I have been searching for 2 days, and someone in town mentioned they saw a man with a goat matching that description." Henry felt his stomach sink even as he nodded toward his corral. "That would be the one. Found her wandering near my fence line. I put up notices in town." "I know," the woman said, and there was something almost apologetic in her tone. "I saw them this morning when I finally made it to Austin. I have been riding through every ranch and homestead between here and my family's land trying to find her. That goat is more trouble than she is worth, but she belonged to my mother, and after Mama passed last year, I cannot bring myself to lose anything else that was hers." The grief in her voice was raw and immediate, and Henry felt his resolve soften. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Let me get her for you." But as he moved toward the corral, the woman followed, and when she saw the goat standing there contentedly chewing on what remained of Henry's rope, her face lit up with such genuine relief that Henry felt something warm unfold in his chest. "Rosemary!" She called out, and the goat's ears perked up. It trotted over to the fence, bleating enthusiastically, and the woman laughed, a sound that seemed to brighten the entire dusty yard. "Rosemary?" Henry asked, unable to keep the amusement from his voice. The woman smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "My mother's idea of humor. She named all our animals after herbs and spices. We had a rooster named Basil and a milk cow called Sage." She reached through the fence to scratch the goat's head, and Rosemary leaned into the touch. "Thank you for taking care of her. I know goats are not the easiest animals to manage." "She has been eating me out of house and home," Henry admitted, "but the company has been nice. I am Henry Xavier, by the way." "Rebecca Zimmerman," the woman replied, offering her hand through the fence. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. "My family has a small farm about 10 miles east of here. It is just me and my father now, and he needs me to help run the place, which is why I could not come looking sooner. We just finished bringing in what little wheat we could salvage from this drought." Henry nodded, understanding the struggle. The drought had hit everyone hard this summer, and more than one family had already packed up and moved on, unable to make it through another season of dust and failed crops. "Must be hard, managing a farm with just 2 people," he said. Rebecca's expression grew guarded, a wall coming up behind her eyes. "We manage well enough," she said, but there was a brittleness to her voice that suggested otherwise. "I should get Rosemary home before dark." "How much do I owe you for your trouble?" "Nothing," Henry said quickly. "I did not do much except give her water and let her destroy some of my equipment." He tried to make it sound light, joking, but Rebecca's expression remained serious. "I do not take charity," she said firmly. "Let me pay you for your time and the feed she ate." "It was not charity," Henry countered. "It was just the decent thing to do. I found a lost animal and looked after it until the owner could be found. That is all." They stood there for a moment, locked in a silent standoff, and Henry could see the pride warring with practicality in Rebecca's face. Finally, she sighed. "My father always says I am too stubborn for my own good," she said. "At least let me bring you some eggs or vegetables from our garden as thanks. We do not have much, but we have that." Henry found himself nodding before he had fully thought it through. The idea of seeing Rebecca again, of having a reason to continue this conversation, was suddenly very appealing. "That would be kind of you," he said. "Though I would not say no to some company either if you ever find yourself with time to spare. It gets quiet out here." Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, a softness that had not been there before. "I imagine it does," she said quietly. "I will bring something by in a few days, after I have caught up on the work I missed while searching for this troublemaker." She gestured to Rosemary, who was now attempting to eat the fence post. Henry opened the gate and led the goat out, fashioning a makeshift lead from some rope that Rosemary had not yet destroyed. As he handed it to Rebecca, their fingers brushed, and Henry felt an electric jolt run through him. Rebecca's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in the dusty heat of a Texas afternoon, connected by a piece of rope and something neither of them could quite name. Then Rosemary bleated impatiently, breaking the spell, and Rebecca stepped back, gathering the lead in her hands. "I should go," she said, but she did not move immediately. "Thank you again, Henry. You did not have to help, but I am grateful you did." "It was my pleasure, Rebecca," he said, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. He watched her mount her horse with the ease of long practice, Rosemary's lead tied to her saddle horn, and then she was riding away, dust kicking up from her horse's hooves. Henry stood there long after she had disappeared from view, feeling the weight of his solitude more acutely than he had in years, but also feeling something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 days passed, and Henry found himself watching the road more than usual, looking for any sign of Rebecca's return. He told himself he was being foolish, that she had probably forgotten her promise, or decided that bringing him vegetables was not worth the ride, but still he looked. He worked harder than necessary, fixing things that did not need fixing, cleaning equipment that was already clean, anything to keep himself from acknowledging the disappointment that grew with each passing hour. On the 4th day, just as he was beginning to accept that he would not see her again, Henry spotted a figure on horseback coming up the road. His heart jumped before he could stop it, and when he recognized Rebecca's distinctive braid and the way she sat in the saddle, he allowed himself a smile. She rode into his yard carrying a basket over one arm, and when she dismounted, Henry could see that her dress was cleaner than before, though still well worn and practical. There was color in her cheeks, and when she smiled at him, Henry felt that same jolt of connection he had experienced before. "I apologize for the delay," Rebecca said as Henry walked over to greet her. "My father came down with a fever, and I could not leave him until I was sure he was on the mend." "Is he all right?" Henry asked, genuine concern in his voice. "He will be," Rebecca said, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "He is stronger than he looks, thankfully, but I brought what I promised." She held out the basket, and Henry took it, catching the scent of fresh bread along with something herbal and green. Inside were eggs carefully wrapped in cloth, a small bunch of carrots, some leafy vegetables he could not name, and a loaf of bread that was still slightly warm. "This is too much," Henry protested, but Rebecca waved him off. "It is what we could spare, and you earned it by taking care of Rosemary," she said firmly. Then her expression softened. "Besides, I wanted to thank you properly. It may seem silly to care so much about a stubborn goat, but she is the last connection I have to my mother, and losing her would have felt like losing Mama all over again." Henry set the basket down on the fence post and looked at Rebecca, really looked at her, seeing the grief she carried and the strength it took to keep going. "It is not silly at all," he said gently. "We hold on to what we can of the people we have lost. That is human nature." Rebecca's eyes glistened, and she blinked rapidly, clearly fighting tears. "My mother died in childbirth," she said quietly, the words coming as if they had been held back too long. "The baby, a boy, only lived a few hours. My father has not been the same since. He works himself to exhaustion every day, barely speaks, barely eats. Sometimes I think he is trying to work himself to death so he can be with her again." Henry reached out instinctively, placing his hand on her shoulder. "I am sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate but offering them anyway. "I lost my father 4 years ago. Consumption. I watched him waste away for months, and there was nothing I could do except make him comfortable. It is a helpless feeling, watching someone you love slip away." "Yes," Rebecca whispered, and a single tear escaped, trailing down her cheek. "Exactly that." They stood there in the afternoon heat, two people bound by loss and loneliness, and something shifted between them, a recognition that ran deeper than words. Henry wanted to pull her into his arms, to offer comfort in the only way he knew how, but he settled for squeezing her shoulder gently before letting his hand fall away. "Would you like to stay for a bit?" he asked. "I could make us some coffee, and you could tell me if there is anything I can do to help with your father's recovery. I am no doctor, but I have some experience with illness." Rebecca hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and desire. "I should not impose," she said, but there was hope in her voice. "You would not be imposing," Henry assured her. "Honestly, I would be grateful for the company. Like I said before, it gets quiet out here, and I have had more conversations with my horse than any man should admit to." That drew a small laugh from Rebecca, and she nodded. "All right," she said, "but only for a little while. I need to get back before dark to make sure my father takes his medicine." Henry led her inside his small cabin, suddenly acutely aware of how sparse and masculine his living space was. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches, just functional furniture and the bare necessities. But Rebecca did not seem to notice or care. She sat in one of the two chairs at his small table while Henry built up the fire in his stove and set the coffee pot to boil. "This is cozy," Rebecca said, looking around. "Different from our farmhouse, which is always chaotic with my father's papers and my mother's things that I cannot bring myself to pack away." "I understand that," Henry said, measuring coffee grounds into the pot. "I kept my father's pipe on the mantel for 2 years after he died. I finally put it away last winter, but it felt wrong, like I was erasing him somehow." "Exactly," Rebecca said, leaning forward. "Everyone tells me I need to move on, to pack up her things and get on with life. But how do you move on from someone who shaped every part of who you are?" "My mother taught me everything. How to cook, how to tend animals, how to read the sky for weather, how to be strong when everything in you wants to fall apart. Without her, I feel like I am just pretending to be the person she raised me to be." The raw honesty in her words struck Henry deeply. He brought 2 tin cups to the table and poured the coffee, steam rising between them. "Maybe that is what it means to honor them," he said slowly, working through the thought as he spoke. "Not forgetting or moving on, but carrying forward what they taught us, being the people they helped us become. My father taught me about responsibility and integrity, about taking care of what is yours and treating people fairly. I try to live by those principles, and in doing so, I keep him alive in some small way." Rebecca cupped her hands around her coffee, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "I never thought of it that way," she said softly. "But you are right. Mama would not want me to spend my life mourning. She would want me to live fully, to find joy where I can, to build something good with what she gave me." They talked for nearly 2 hours, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Rebecca told him about the farm, about the struggles of keeping it running with limited water and even more limited help. Henry told her about his small herd and his plans to expand once the drought broke. They discovered they had both loved school but had to leave after 8th grade to work their family's land. They both preferred coffee to tea, though Rebecca confessed she sometimes dreamed of having enough sugar to make it sweet. They both missed having someone to share meals with, someone to break the silence of long evenings. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Rebecca reluctantly stood. "I really should get home," she said, but Henry could hear the reluctance in her voice. "My father will worry if I am gone too long." "Of course," Henry said, standing as well. He walked her outside where her horse waited patiently. As Rebecca prepared to mount, she paused and turned to him. "Henry," she said, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. "Would it be all right if I visited again? I mean, if you truly do not mind the company. It has been so long since I have had someone to talk to who understands, who does not look at me with pity or treat me like I am about to break." "I would like that very much," Henry said, and the smile that broke across Rebecca's face made his chest ache in the best possible way. "In fact, I insist on it. Someone needs to make sure that goat of yours stays out of trouble, and you might as well keep me informed of her progress." Rebecca laughed, and it was a lighter sound than before, less burdened. "Rosemary is probably plotting her next escape as we speak," she said. "That goat has caused me more grief than anything else on the farm, but I cannot help loving her stubborn nature." "Sounds like someone I know," Henry said before he could stop himself, and then flushed when he realized how forward that sounded. But Rebecca just smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Perhaps stubbornness is a survival trait out here," she said. "The weak do not last long in Texas." Henry helped her mount, and as she gathered her reins, he found himself reluctant to let her go. "Be safe riding home," he said. "And if your father's fever returns, send word. I can ride into town for the doctor." "Thank you," Rebecca said, and the warmth in her voice wrapped around Henry like a blanket. "I will see you soon, Henry Xavier." He watched her ride away again, but this time the loneliness that settled over him was tempered by anticipation. She would be back. She had promised, and something in the way she had looked at him told him she was as affected by their connection as he was. Over the following weeks, Rebecca became a regular visitor to Henry's ranch. She would arrive in the late afternoon, always bringing some small offering from her farm, eggs or vegetables, or occasionally a jar of preserves her mother had made before she died. They would sit on Henry's porch as the heat of the day faded, talking about everything and nothing, sharing the comfortable silence that comes when two people are genuinely at ease with each other. Henry learned that Rebecca had once dreamed of being a teacher, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore, and that she had a quick wit and a sharp tongue when something struck her as unjust. She had strong opinions about women's suffrage and believed that if women could run farms and businesses, they certainly deserved the right to vote. Henry found himself agreeing with her, drawn to her intelligence and passion. Rebecca learned that Henry had a gentle soul beneath his weathered exterior, that he could quote poetry his mother had taught him as a child, and that he had a talent for woodworking that he rarely indulged. He carved small animals when he could not sleep, and when Rebecca admired a small horse he had left on his windowsill, he gave it to her without hesitation, his ears turning red when she thanked him. They helped each other with chores, Henry riding over to Rebecca's farm to help repair a broken wagon wheel or reinforce a fence that her father had not maintained properly. Rebecca would bring fresh bandages when she noticed Henry had cut his hand on barbed wire, cleaning and dressing the wound with capable hands while scolding him for not being more careful. The attraction between them grew with each visit, an undercurrent that neither acknowledged directly but both felt acutely. Henry would catch himself staring at the way the light caught in Rebecca's hair, or the way her nose crinkled when she laughed. Rebecca would find excuses to touch his arm when making a point, or to stand close enough that their shoulders brushed. One evening in early September, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Rebecca said quietly, "My father asked about you." Henry turned to look at her, trying to read her expression in the fading light. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if you were courting me," Rebecca said, and there was a slight tremor in her voice. "I told him we were friends, that you had been kind enough to return Rosemary and we had struck up an acquaintance. But he is not foolish, Henry. He sees how often I ride out here, and he knows I do not make this much effort for simple friendship." Henry's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Rebecca could hear it. "What do you want to tell him?" he asked carefully. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. "I want to tell him the truth," she finally said. "That I have feelings for you, that spending time with you has become the best part of my days, and that I think about you constantly when we are apart. But I am also practical enough to know that wanting something does not make it possible." "What do you mean?" Henry asked, though he feared he knew. "I mean that my father needs me," Rebecca said, and there was anguish in her voice. "I cannot leave him alone on the farm, not when he can barely function from one day to the next. And you have your ranch to run, your own responsibilities. I do not see how we could build anything real when we are both tied to separate pieces of land." Henry stood and moved to the porch railing, gripping it tightly as he thought through what he wanted to say. "What if we found a way?" he asked, turning back to face her. "What if there was a solution that meant neither of us had to give up what we are responsible for?" Rebecca looked up at him, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "What are you suggesting?" Henry took a deep breath, knowing he was about to make himself completely vulnerable. "I am suggesting that maybe your father could come live here on my land. I have been thinking about it for weeks now, ever since you told me about his situation. I have more than enough room, and combining our resources would make both operations stronger. Your father could help me with my herd, and I could help maintain your farm until we figured out what to do with it. Maybe rent it out, or sell it if that is what you all decided. The point is, Rebecca, I do not want to lose you because of geography or obligation. I want to find a way to make this work because I have feelings for you too, and they are not going away." Rebecca stood slowly, her eyes wide. "You would do that," she whispered. "You would take on the burden of my father, of our struggles, just to be with me." "It would not be a burden," Henry said firmly, crossing to her. "It would be a family, Rebecca. That is what I have been missing all these years, not just company but family. People to care for and who care for me. Your father deserves better than to waste away in grief, and you deserve better than to spend your life trying to hold together something that may be beyond saving. Together, we could build something new, something that honors what we have both lost while giving us a future." Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but she was smiling through them. "You barely know me," she said, but there was no real protest in her voice. "I know enough," Henry said, reaching up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I know that you are strong and kind and stubborn as hell. I know that you make me want to be a better man, that you make me laugh and think and feel things I thought I had buried with my father. I know that when you are here, this place feels like a home instead of just a house. That is enough for me to know this is real." "Henry," Rebecca breathed, and then she was kissing him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she pressed herself against him. Henry's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss was everything he had imagined and more, sweet and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rebecca rested her forehead against his. "I am terrified," she admitted. "I am terrified of hoping for this, of believing it could actually work, because I do not think I could survive losing something else." "You will not lose me," Henry promised, his voice fierce. "I am not going anywhere, Rebecca. I am here and I am committed to making this work, whatever it takes." They stood there holding each other as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge overhead. Finally, Rebecca pulled back enough to look up at him. "I need to talk to my father," she said. "I need to explain everything and see what he thinks. He may not be willing to leave the farm, even in its current condition." "I understand," Henry said, though the thought of waiting made him anxious. "But Rebecca, no matter what he decides, I want you to know that I am in this. If he will not leave the farm, then I will find a way to help from here. If he agrees to move, then we will do whatever we need to make him comfortable. The details do not matter as much as the fact that I want a future with you." "I want that too," Rebecca said softly. "More than I have wanted anything in a very long time." Henry walked her to her horse, reluctant to let her go but knowing she needed to have this conversation with her father. Before she mounted, he pulled her in for one more kiss, this one tender and lingering. "Ride safely," he murmured against her lips, "and come back to me soon." "I will," Rebecca promised, and then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness with only the sound of her horse's hooves to mark her passage. Henry did not sleep that night. He paced his cabin, planning and worrying in equal measure. What if Rebecca's father refused? What if he became angry at the suggestion and forbade Rebecca from seeing Henry again? What if Henry had moved too fast, pushed too hard, and ruined the best thing that had come into his life in years? But when the sun rose the next morning, Henry forced himself to go about his regular chores. He fed his cattle, checked his fences, worked on repairing a broken gate. He was hauling water from his well when he saw two figures on horseback approaching, and his heart leaped when he recognized Rebecca on her horse, and an older man beside her on a tired-looking mare. Rebecca's father, Robert Zimmerman, was thin to the point of gauntness, his face deeply lined with grief and hardship. But his eyes were sharp as they assessed Henry and the ranch, taking in every detail. Henry set down his bucket and walked forward, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Mr. Zimmerman," he said, offering his hand. "I am Henry Xavier. It is an honor to meet you, sir." Robert dismounted slowly, moving like a man whose body ached, and took Henry's hand in a surprisingly firm grip. "My daughter tells me you have made quite an impression on her," he said, his voice gravelly. "Says you want to take on a broken-down farmer and his stubborn daughter. That true?" Henry met his gaze steadily. "I want to build a life with your daughter, sir. And if that means helping you get back on your feet, then that is what I will do. Not out of pity or charity, but because family takes care of family, and I would be honored to consider you family." Something flickered in Robert's eyes, an emotion Henry could not quite name. The older man looked at Rebecca, who was still mounted, watching the exchange with barely concealed anxiety. "He always this earnest?" Robert asked her. "Always," Rebecca replied, and there was affection in her voice. Robert turned back to Henry. "My daughter also tells me you lost your father young, that you have been running this place on your own for years. That is not easy work." "No, sir, it is not," Henry agreed. "But it is good work, honest work, and it would be easier with help, with family to share the load and the rewards." Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying Henry's face. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I appreciate what you are offering," he said. "But I need you to understand something, son. I am not the man I used to be. Since my wife died, I have been lost, just going through the motions. I have not been the father Rebecca deserves, and I have let our farm fall apart around me. I do not know if I can be the help you think you are getting." "With respect, sir," Henry said gently, "I think you are selling yourself short. Rebecca tells me you were one of the best farmers in the county before your wife passed. That knowledge does not disappear just because you are grieving. It might take time to remember who you were before the loss, but I believe that man is still in there. And even if I am wrong, even if all you can do is sit on the porch and keep us company, that would still be enough. You are Rebecca's father, and that makes you important to me." Robert's eyes grew glassy, and he looked away, clearing his throat roughly. "You love her, then?" he asked. "I do," Henry said without hesitation. "I know it has not been long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. She is everything I did not know I was looking for." "Papa," Rebecca said softly, finally dismounting. She walked over and put her hand on her father's arm. "Henry is a good man. He makes me happy in a way I have not been since Mama died. Please give this a chance. Give us a chance." Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Henry could see the moment when the older man recognized the light in her eyes, the hope that had been missing for so long. "All right," he said finally. "We will try it. But I am warning you both, I am set in my ways and not easy to live with." "None of us are easy to live with," Henry said with a smile, "but we will figure it out together." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked to move Robert and Rebecca to Henry's ranch. It was decided that they would try to sell Rebecca's farm, but in the meantime, Henry hired a young man from town to look after the animals still there and maintain the property. Robert brought his most essential belongings, and Rebecca brought her mother's things, the precious items she could not bear to leave behind. Henry cleared out his small storage room for Robert, building a proper bed frame and making the space as comfortable as he could. Rebecca would stay in the main sleeping area behind a curtain Henry hung for privacy, at least until they were properly married. That had been Robert's one firm condition, that there would be no impropriety under his roof, and both Henry and Rebecca had readily agreed. The first few days were awkward, all three of them learning to navigate shared space and new routines. Robert was quieter than Henry had expected, often sitting on the porch watching the land with an expression that was hard to read. Rebecca threw herself into cooking and cleaning, making Henry's sparse cabin feel more like a home with small touches. Wildflowers in a tin cup on the table, her mother's quilt draped over the back of the sofa, the smell of bread baking filling the rooms. Henry worked harder than ever, determined to prove that his plan could work. He expanded his vegetable garden, repaired every structure on the property until everything was sound, and began planning for the future. In the evenings, he would sit with Rebecca and her father, talking about the next day's tasks or sharing stories from before their losses had defined them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Robert started offering suggestions about the cattle, noticing things Henry had missed in his inexperience. One morning, Henry found the older man already up and working on fixing a broken fence rail, moving slowly but with purpose. Rebecca's smiles came more easily, and she began to sing while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, and Henry fell more in love with Rebecca every single day. The way she hummed while cooking, the way she left little notes for him tucked into his coat pocket with reminders or simple words of encouragement. The way she would find him after a long day and just stand close, letting their shoulders touch in comfortable silence. 2 months after Rebecca and Robert moved in, Henry rode into Austin to speak with the pastor at the small church on the edge of town. Reverend Thomas was an elderly man with kind eyes who had presided over Henry's father's funeral and knew the Xavier family well. "I want to marry Rebecca Zimmerman," Henry told him without preamble, "as soon as possible if you are willing to perform the ceremony." Reverend Thomas smiled. "I have heard about you and Miss Zimmerman," he said. "The town talk is that you are quite smitten. Tell me, son, are you certain about this? Marriage is a sacred commitment, not something to enter into lightly." "I have never been more certain of anything," Henry said firmly. "Rebecca is my future, Reverend. She is my partner, my friend, the person who makes me want to be better. I do not want to wait any longer to make her my wife." "And Miss Zimmerman feels the same?" the Reverend asked gently. "She does," Henry confirmed. "We have discussed it extensively. Her father has given his blessing as well, though I think he would prefer a traditional courtship. But given that we are already living on the same property, even with all propriety observed, it seems more practical to marry sooner rather than later." Reverend Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I can perform the ceremony in 3 weeks after the banns have been read. That will give you time to make proper arrangements and ensure everything is done correctly." "Will you want a large wedding?" "No," Henry said immediately. "Just something small. Rebecca's father, perhaps a few friends from town if they want to come. Rebecca lost her mother last year, and she is still raw from that grief. I do not think she wants a big celebration, just a quiet ceremony that makes our commitment official." "That sounds perfectly appropriate," the Reverend said. "Come by next Sunday with Miss Zimmerman and we will finalize the details." When Henry returned home and told Rebecca what he had done, she threw her arms around him and held on tight. "3 weeks," she whispered. "In 3 weeks I will be your wife." "If you still want to be," Henry teased gently. "You have not seen me at my worst yet. I snore, apparently, according to my father, and I am terrible at remembering to sweep the floor." Rebecca laughed, the sound joyful and free. "I snore too, and I am worse than terrible at sewing, which is apparently a requirement for proper womanhood. I think we will survive each other's flaws just fine." Those 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rebecca sewed herself a new dress, simple but beautiful, from fabric Henry bought in town. Robert became more animated than he had been since arriving, helping Henry build new shelves for the cabin and repair the barn roof. The older man still had quiet days when the grief was heavy on him, but they were becoming less frequent, and Henry could see him slowly coming back to life. The night before the wedding, as Henry sat on the porch watching the stars, Robert came out and settled into the chair beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while before Robert spoke. "I want to thank you," he said quietly, "for giving me a reason to keep going. After Sarah died, I thought my life was over. I was just waiting to join her, going through the motions for Rebecca's sake, but not really living. But being here, having purpose again, seeing my daughter happy, it has reminded me that life is still worth living, even in grief." Henry felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You do not need to thank me, sir. You have given me far more than I have given you. You have given me your daughter, your trust, and your help building something good here. I am the one who is grateful." Robert reached over and clasped Henry's shoulder. "You are a good man, Henry Xavier. My Sarah would have liked you very much. She always hoped Rebecca would find someone who saw her strength, who did not try to diminish her spirit. You are that man." "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her," Henry promised. "You already are," Robert said simply. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning in 1878, the first coolness of fall finally breaking the oppressive heat. Rebecca wore her new dress, her dark hair braided with small wildflowers woven through it, and when Henry saw her walking toward him in the small church, he felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her green eyes shining with happiness and love, and Henry knew he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Reverend Thomas performed a simple ceremony, speaking about commitment and partnership, about building a life on the foundation of love and respect. When it came time for vows, Henry took Rebecca's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Rebecca, from the moment you rode into my life looking for a wayward goat, I knew something had changed. You brought light into my darkness, purpose into my solitude, and love into my heart. I promise to stand by you in all things, to support your dreams, to share your burdens, and to love you with everything I have for all the days I am given. You have made me whole, and I will spend my life trying to do the same for you." Rebecca was crying openly, but her voice was steady when she spoke her own vows. "Henry, you gave me hope when I had none. You showed me that love is still possible even after profound loss. You have been patient with my grief, gentle with my fears, and steadfast in your commitment. I promise to be your partner in all things, to work beside you to build the life we both dream of, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both shall live. You are my future, and I am grateful every day that a stubborn goat led me to you." When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed Rebecca with all the tenderness and passion he felt, and the small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony erupted in applause. They held a modest reception at the ranch, with food Rebecca and Henry had prepared over the past few days. Friends from neighboring ranches came, people who had known Henry's father and who welcomed Rebecca into their community with open arms. As the sun set and people began to head home, Henry and Rebecca stood together, his arm around her waist, watching their new family and friends celebrate their union. "Happy?" Henry asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Rebecca replied, leaning into him. "Thank you for not giving up that goat without a fight," Henry laughed. "I did not fight very hard, as I recall. I gave her back pretty easily." "But you kept part of her," Rebecca said, looking up at him. "You kept me." "Best decision I ever made," Henry said, and kissed his wife again as the stars began to appear overhead. Their wedding night was tender and tentative, both nervous despite their certainty about each other. Henry had moved his belongings to the main sleeping area, giving Robert the small storage room permanently, and he and Rebecca finally had privacy. They explored each other slowly, carefully, learning what brought pleasure and comfort. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness, of two souls finding their home in each other. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Rebecca traced patterns on Henry's chest. "I never thought I would have this," she whispered. "After Mama died, I convinced myself that love was too painful, that I was better off alone. I am so glad I was wrong." "So am I," Henry said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though I have to say, I owe Rosemary a debt of gratitude. Without her wandering off, I might never have met you." "That ridiculous goat," Rebecca said with affection. "She is probably at home right now eating something she should not be eating and causing chaos. I need to ride back tomorrow and check on the farm." "We will ride back together," Henry corrected gently. "You are not alone anymore, Rebecca. We are partners in everything now." The months that followed were among the happiest of Henry's life. He and Rebecca worked side by side every day, building their ranch into something substantial. They purchased more cattle with the money from selling Rebecca's farm, which had finally found a buyer in a young family moving to Texas from Missouri. With Robert's experience and Henry's energy, they expanded the operation, building new fences and a proper barn. Rebecca transformed the cabin into a true home, adding curtains and cushions, planting flowers around the porch, and filling the space with warmth and life. She took over the cooking entirely, preparing meals that were far better than Henry's simple fare had ever been. In the evenings, the three of them would sit together, Robert teaching Henry everything he knew about farming and animal husbandry, Rebecca reading aloud from books Henry bought her in town. Robert continued to improve, the color returning to his face and the strength to his frame. He still had hard days when the grief would overwhelm him, but they were fewer and farther between. He spoke of Sarah now without only sadness, remembering the good times as well as mourning her loss. Henry could see Rebecca's relief at having her father back, even if he was a changed version of the man he had been before. The first winter was hard, as winters in Texas could be, but they faced it together. When a cold snap killed 3 of their cattle, they butchered them quickly and preserved the meat, wasting nothing. When the well froze, Henry and Robert worked together to thaw it, their breath fogging in the cold air as they labored. When Rebecca came down with a fever, both men hovered anxiously until it broke, taking turns sitting with her and bringing her broth and water. Spring brought new life to the ranch. 3 of their cows gave birth to healthy calves, and Rebecca's garden, much expanded from Henry's original modest plot, flourished with vegetables and herbs. They acquired chickens, and every morning Rebecca would collect eggs, often finding Rosemary trying to sneak into the hen house to cause trouble. The goat had been brought over from Rebecca's old farm, and now resided in a reinforced pen that she still occasionally escaped from, much to everyone's exasperation. In May of 1879, Rebecca told Henry she was pregnant. They were in the garden, weeding between rows of young plants when she suddenly sat back on her heels and placed a hand on her stomach. Henry looked over, concerned, but Rebecca was smiling, that radiant smile that still made his heart skip. "I am with child," she said simply. "I have been sure for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be certain before I told you." Henry dropped his tools and crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he breathed, wonder filling his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she must have seen the answer on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Henry said, cupping her face and kissing her deeply. "You have given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a family, a purpose, and now a child. I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." They told Robert that evening, and the older man's reaction was equally emotional. He embraced his daughter carefully, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Your mother would be so proud," he said hoarsely. "So very proud." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall. Rebecca continued working as much as she could, though Henry became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and avoid heavy labor. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, occasionally reminding him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and she was not made of glass. As Rebecca's belly grew, so did their excitement and anticipation. Henry spent his evenings building a cradle, using his woodworking skills to craft something beautiful and sturdy. Robert helped construct a small addition to the cabin, a separate room that would serve as a nursery. They worked through the fall, determined to have it finished before the baby arrived. In December, as the first cold winds of winter swept across the ranch, Rebecca went into labor. Henry sent Robert riding hard into Austin to fetch the midwife, a practical woman named Martha Chen, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Then he stayed with Rebecca, holding her hand and wiping her forehead as the contractions grew stronger and closer together. "I am terrified," Rebecca admitted during a brief respite between pains. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" "You can do this," Henry said firmly, though his own fear was a living thing in his chest. "You are the strongest person I know, Rebecca, and I am right here with you. I am not going anywhere." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Martha arrived and took charge, her calm competence steadying everyone's nerves. Robert paced outside, unable to bear being in the room but unwilling to leave the cabin entirely. Henry stayed by Rebecca's side through every contraction, every scream, every moment of pain, lending her his strength when her own wavered. Finally, as the sun rose on a cold December morning, their son was born. The baby's first cry was the most beautiful sound Henry had ever heard, and when Martha placed the squalling infant in his arms, he felt his whole world shift. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair in his mother's eyes, and Henry fell completely in love in an instant. "A boy," he said wonderingly, looking at Rebecca, who was exhausted but beaming. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Henry thought for a moment, then said softly, "What about Samuel after my father?" "And Robert as his middle name after yours." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Robert Xavier," she said, testing the name. "It is perfect. Help me hold him, Henry." Henry carefully placed their son in Rebecca's arms, and as she gazed down at the baby, Henry saw all the love and wonder he felt reflected in her face. Robert was allowed in then, and when he saw his grandson, he wept openly, overcome with emotion. The first year of Samuel's life was marked by exhaustion and joy in equal measure. The baby was colicky and rarely slept through the night, leaving all three adults bleary-eyed and staggering through their days. But every smile, every new sound, every milestone made the sleepless nights worthwhile. Rebecca proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving even when Samuel was at his most difficult. Henry found depths of tenderness in himself he had not known existed, spending hours walking the floor with his son, singing the songs his own mother had sung to him. Robert was completely besotted with his grandson, often found holding the baby and telling him stories about his grandmother Sarah, keeping her memory alive for the next generation. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They had weathered the drought, and now, with better rains, their operation expanded. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the cattle, young men from town who were grateful for steady work. Henry taught them everything his father had taught him, passing down the knowledge and principles that had guided his life. Rebecca became known in the community for her kindness and capability. She often helped other women on nearby ranches, bringing food when someone was sick, or assisting with births when Martha the midwife could not get there in time. She had a gift for healing, using the herbal knowledge her mother had passed down, and people began to seek her out when they needed remedies. In the spring of 1881, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and when their daughter was born in October, the birth was quicker and less frightening. They named her Sarah, after Rebecca's mother, and she was a calm, placid baby who seemed content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes. Their family was complete, or so they thought. But 2 years later, Rebecca found herself pregnant once more, and in May of 1884 they welcomed another son whom they named Thomas, after Reverend Thomas, who had married them and become a good friend. The cabin had to be expanded again, and now it bore little resemblance to the sparse bachelor quarters it had once been. It was a proper home, filled with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Henry would sometimes stand on the porch in the evenings, watching Rebecca play with the children in the yard while Robert sat whittling nearby, and feel overwhelmed by gratitude for how his life had turned out. Robert lived to see all 3 grandchildren, though the years were catching up with him. In the summer of 1886, he became ill with pneumonia, and despite Rebecca and Henry's best efforts to nurse him through it, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his family. They buried him on the ranch, next to where Henry's father was laid to rest, and Rebecca read a passage from Sarah's Bible that her mother had loved. Samuel, now 6 years old, placed wildflowers on his grandfather's grave, and Henry held his wife as she wept for the father who had finally found peace. Life continued, as it always does. The children grew and the ranch prospered. Samuel showed an early aptitude for working with animals, while Sarah inherited her mother's gift for healing and her father's steady temperament. Thomas was the wild one, constantly getting into mischief, but with such charm that he could talk his way out of trouble more often than not. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Henry and Rebecca would sit on the porch they had expanded over the years, holding hands and watching the stars. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence that comes from years of partnership. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if Rosemary had not wandered off that day? Rebecca asked one night, her head resting on Henry's shoulder. All the time, Henry admitted. I think about the lonely man I was, talking to my horse and convincing myself I was content with solitude. And then I look at our life now, and I cannot imagine having missed any of it. That stubborn goat gave us everything, Rebecca said with a laugh. Rosemary, now ancient in goat years, still lived in her pen, though she was too old now for escape attempts. She brought me to you and you gave me back my life. We gave each other our lives, Henry corrected gently. I was just existing before you, Rebecca. You taught me how to truly live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. Every good thing I have is because of you. Rebecca lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. We built something beautiful, did we not? Out of loss and loneliness and a wandering goat, we built this family, this home, this life. The most beautiful thing I could imagine, Henry agreed, and kissed his wife with all the love and passion he had felt from the first moment he saw her riding into his yard, determined and desperate and absolutely perfect. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who took on more and more of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with skill and dedication. Sarah married a kind doctor who set up practice in Austin, and they visited often, bringing Henry and Rebecca's first grandchild, a girl they named Rebecca in honor of her grandmother. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, left Texas to seek his fortune in California, though he wrote letters faithfully and returned home every few years, full of stories about the wider world. Each time he left, Rebecca would cry, but she was proud of his courage and independence. Henry and Rebecca grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with work and age, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened, tempered by years of partnership and shared experience. They had weathered droughts and floods, disease and hardship, loss and grief, but they had done it together, and that had made all the difference. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter, 3 generations sharing a meal and memories. After dinner, as the children ran around the yard and the adults talked on the porch, Samuel stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, waiting until he had everyone's attention. "To my parents, who have shown me what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic kind from storybooks, but the real thing, the love that shows up every day, that works and sacrifices and never gives up. You built this ranch, this family, this legacy, out of nothing but determination and devotion to each other. Everything we have, everything we are, comes from the foundation you created. So here is to you, to 25 years of marriage, and to however many more you are blessed with. We love you both." Henry felt tears prick his eyes as everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast. He looked at Rebecca and saw the same emotion reflected in her face. She squeezed his hand, and in that simple gesture, he felt the weight of every moment they had shared, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had celebrated. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Henry and Rebecca walked out to the corral where it had all begun. The moon was full, casting silver light across the familiar landscape, and they stood together, remembering. "I still cannot believe how lucky I was," Henry said softly. "That out of all the ranches in Texas, your goat wandered onto mine, that you were brave enough to come looking for her, that I was smart enough not to let you leave without figuring out a way to see you again." "It was not luck," Rebecca said, leaning into him. "It was fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other, Henry. I believe that with my whole heart. Everything that happened to bring us together, all the pain and loss we experienced before we met, it was all leading to this. To us, to our family, to the life we have built." "I love you," Henry said, the words as true and heartfelt as they had been on their wedding day. "I have loved you from the moment you demanded I give back your goat, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Rebecca replied, turning in his arms to face him. My lonely cowboy who kept my goat and won my heart. You are everything I never knew I needed, and I am grateful every day that I found you." They kissed under the moonlight, two people who had taken the fragments of their broken lives and forged them into something whole and beautiful. And if a certain old goat in the nearby pen bleated softly, as if acknowledging her role in bringing them together, well, they chose to believe it was her way of saying she had known all along how it would turn out. Henry Xavier lived to be 73 years old, and Rebecca to 71. They died within 6 months of each other, having spent nearly 50 years as husband and wife. They were buried on the ranch they had built together, under a large oak tree they had planted the year Samuel was born. Their children made sure the headstone reflected the love that had defined their lives, the inscription simple but profound. "Here lie Henry Xavier and Rebecca Xavier, beloved parents and grandparents. They found each other through faith and a wandering goat, and built a legacy of love that endures beyond death. Together in life, together in eternity." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Samuel to his children and eventually to their children. Each generation added their own touches, expanded the operation, modernized as times changed, but the foundation remained the same. The values Henry and Rebecca had instilled, the importance of family, hard work, integrity, and love, these continued to guide the Xavier family long after the original builders had passed. And in the family archives, carefully preserved, was a carved wooden goat that Henry had made for Rebecca on their first anniversary, a tribute to the stubborn animal that had brought them together. Alongside it was Rebecca's journal, where she had recorded the story of their meeting and courtship, wanting future generations to know how something as simple as retrieving a lost goat had led to a love that changed everything. Their story became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places. That loneliness can be transformed into belonging, that grief can give way to joy, and that love, when it is real and true and fought for every single day, can build something that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. The wandering goat, Rosemary, had lived to the remarkable age of 15, outliving most goats by several years, as if determined to see the happiness she had inadvertently caused. When she finally passed, Henry and Rebecca buried her in the pasture and planted a rosemary bush over her grave, the herb flourishing in that spot for decades afterward, filling the air with its sharp, clean scent each summer. Visitors to the ranch in later years would often ask about the carved wooden goat displayed prominently in the main house, and whoever was home would smile and tell the story. About a lonely cowboy and a determined woman, and a stubborn goat that refused to stay where it belonged. About how sometimes the interruptions in our carefully ordered lives are actually redirections toward something better. About how taking care of someone else's lost creature can lead to finding something precious you did not even know you were missing. And always, the story ended the same way, with the reminder that Henry and Rebecca had taught everyone who knew them. That love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day in 1,000 small actions and a few large ones. That building a life with someone means showing up even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. That family is not just blood but the people who stand with you through everything, who see you at your worst and love you anyway, who help you become the best version of yourself. The legacy of Henry and Rebecca Xavier was not just the successful ranch or the large extended family they created. It was the example they set, the proof that two broken people can find each other and build something whole. That loss does not have to be the end of the story, but can be the beginning of a new chapter. That sometimes all it takes is one moment of connection, one decision to be kind to a stranger, one wandering goat, to change the entire trajectory of a life. In the end, their story was simple. A woman came to retrieve her goat. A lonely man kept the goat just long enough to meet her. And in that meeting, two lost souls found home in each other, building a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of opening your heart even when you think it is safer to keep it closed. They had taken a chance on each other, and that chance had given them everything. Their love story became the foundation upon which an entire family was built. And though Henry and Rebecca were long gone, their spirit remained in every corner of the ranch, in every decision their descendants made, in the values that continued to guide the Xavier family. They had won each other's hearts with patience and kindness, with hard work and determination, and with the understanding that real love is not about grand gestures but about showing up, day after day, choosing each other over and over again. And somewhere in the Texas Hill Country, under an oak tree that had grown massive and strong, two people rested side by side. Their bodies returned to the earth they had worked so hard, but their love living on in the family they had created, the home they had built, and the story that would be told for generations to come. The story of how she came to retrieve a wandering goat, how the lonely cowboy kept the goat just long enough, and how in doing so, he won her heart and built a legacy that would never be forgotten.